and he was not in IT, but he was always on my you know what about moving up, you know. Welcome to Debt Free in IT. I'm your host, Mike. This podcast is for anyone who's looking to get into the IT industry, whether it's for a career change or you're just interested. I think you come to the right place. So your first 5 years in IT can make or break your career. In this video, I'll share some lessons from my own journey, the moves I made, the mistakes I learned from, and a roadmap that can help you get ahead fast. So let's get to it. So the first thing I want to emphasize on for planning your first 5 years in IT is realizing that breaking in isn't easy, but certifications can help you stand out. So let's look at my first role. So my first role was in computer operations. So basically in a data center, answering phone calls, running backups, etc. You know, checking on servers, making sure there's nothing overheating. Basically, you're monitoring a data center, and also you're doing a little bit of help desk too. That's why it's computer ops, because you're on them phones too. So, you know, like I always say, that first role, usually those phones going to be involved somewhere. So you're on those phones. So basically, I got this role after applying to many other roles. It took a long time for me to get a call back. So basically, when I was applying, I was working at another place. So I was working at Advanced Auto. But the main thing is I would always go on Indeed. You know, I always keep tabs on whatever the job websites is. So I was going on Indeed. I was applying to roles. When I applied for this particular role, it was roughly 6 months or a year before I even got a call back. So I applied to many roles. For about 6 months or so, I got a call back to come in for an interview. Basically, I don't even think I knew what the interview was for. I just knew I had an interview. So basically, I got the call back. That's when I realized that it was this computer operations job I'd applied for months before. So when I eventually got hired for that position, one of the things that helped me to stand out was, at the time, I was CCNA certified. So the CCNA, like I said, it's a pretty decent cert. You know, it's one of those certs that will get you noticed. So especially in my area, you know, I was in a small area at the time. So that CCNA, you didn't run across too many applicants that may have had that's in that particular area. So the CCNA was one of the things I was told that helped me stand out. And like I said, even though I got that CCNA, I still had to go in and basically do pretty good on the interview. So the CCNA wasn't like a slam dunk or anything, but having it on my application basically made my application stand out, because a lot of times you often hear any IT professional say that when you first apply for a job, a lot of times it's a computer going through your resume. You know, a lot of times those computers going to pull those keywords. And one of the main keywords in IT, regardless of what position you're going for, especially networking or help desk or desktop, some of those keywords is definitely going to be within those certifications. So the CCNA, a lot of times I put it on my resume, I abbreviated CCNA, and also I put the whole name, Cisco Certified Networking Associate. So a lot of times my resume would get pulled because of that. So that helped me to stand out. And then after I got hired, my certification was about to expire. You know, like I say before, those certifications, roughly, they last about 3 years. Then you either need to move to the net certification or retake that same certification and get recertified. And then when we look at some of the main takeaways from this, so one takeaway that I get from this when I look back on it is that certifications plus being patient can help you get in the door, can help you get that first position. So a lot of times I say you're going to rely on patience more than anything, because like I said, that certification helped me to get the interview, helped me to stand out. But that patience, boy, when I say that patience is what kept me applying. You know, the whole time, like I said, I wasn't in a rush. I had a job, wasn't a good job, but you know what I'm saying, it was putting money in my pocket. You know, so I was very patient. I knew that one day it would eventually come. You know, basically a lot of things with consistency. So I was consistent at going on Indeed and applying for different IT jobs. So, and like I always say, after I got in, I realized that a lot of those jobs I was applying for, I wasn't even qualified for. So some of them, like I said, I was applying for engineer roles, things like that. Anything I saw that had CCNA attached to it, I basically applied for it. So that certification, along with being patient, is the key thing to take away, because when you're looking for that first role, sometimes for some folks, man, I had some classmates, time we got out of school, they had that first job and it was a pretty good job. They built their career early. Some people like me, like I said, it took almost 3 years, before I could get started on building my career. So take it as, okay, some people get it early, some people get it a little later. But the main thing is, between both people, is you got to keep applying. You can't apply for a month, then say that, oh, this ain't going to work. Let me go to something else. You can't do that with anything. So keep applying. One day it will come through, and always just stay ready. As I like to say, stay ready so you ain't got to get ready. So stay up on stay up on whatever you're applying for. Stay deep into it. Keep on doing your labs and everything, but keep applying. That's the main thing. Keep applying. So looking back on my career, one thing I noticed is that those mentorships I had, even though back then we didn't call them mentorships, they were just friends or people that we talked to, and that encouragement, from family members, all of that goes a long way. You don't realize it at the time. So there was a couple people I think was pivotal in my career. So during the first couple of years, some of the folks that helped me out, one of the people that stands out is my brother. So I do have an older brother, and he was not in IT, but he was always on my about moving up. So he was on my ass about moving up. He constantly was like, hey, you need to go out and try to make more money. You need to move up to this position. So even though he wasn't in IT, he knew what IT made. He knew the potential that was there in IT. So he was one of the first couple people on my tail, about moving up and things like that. And then also, like I said, your family in general, all of them will encourage you. But like I said, my brother, he was on me hard about, progressing to the next level. And then that brings me on to my brother-in-law. So like I said, my brother-in-law was the person that I could go to for every job change, because he was in IT. He knew that language, even though he wasn't in networking, but he knew that language. So if I needed to vent one day, I could call and vent to him because he understood what I was talking about. Where the average person may not have understood what I'm talking about, especially after you had a long day and you're in IT. So some people you tell them about your long day, they may look at it as, man, you ain't doing no manual labor, so, ain't nothing harder than that. But some people don't realize some of the mental drain that goes on when you're in the IT industry. So my brother-in-law was that person I could call up and vent to. And then when I was ready to make a career move, I could call him, and basically he was the type of person that he'll lead you to your own decision. So you call him, he ain't going to really tell you which way to go or things like that, but he's going to ask you questions that make you realize the answer. So he's one of those folks, and I appreciated that, because at the time, it wasn't nobody else that I knew in IT that I could talk to. So with a lot of things you get involved in, it's always better when you got someone, nowadays they call them mentors, but you got someone that's in that same field or can speak that same language that you can call, talk to, vent, bounce ideas off of. So whenever I got ready for a job change, I would call, talk to him, talk it over, things like that. And that's something I still do to this day. So, saying if it ever comes a point where I'm switching careers, a lot of times he's that one person that I call. So the last person that stand out was one of my coworkers. So like I said, I'm not going to mention his name. I'm not sure if he want to be mentioned or anything, but this coworker was one of the ones where we became friends. Basically, as I was getting ready to move up to my last position, which was basically networking, I could talk to him, and basically he was that encouragement to go ahead and make that move, because as you all hear me say, I try to be transparent with everything. As you all hear me say, I was frightened about going to networking. I wasn't ready for that responsibility, or I didn't think I was ready for that responsibility, because in my head, it always played out the scenario of, what if I get called 3:00 in the morning and I can't fix that issue? That was always on my head. That was always going through my mind. Like, what do I do? So like I said, this coworker was one of the ones that made me kind of see the light. if you may say, but he made me see where, it was a good career move, so I was able to go through and I ended up, like I said, going into networking. So the next thing to help you out on your first 5 years in IT is basically being able to adapt to your surroundings. So adaptability is key because for most people, before you get into the IT industry, you're coming from positions where your manager may be a micromanager where they're monitoring every little thing you do. You know what I'm saying? You go to the restroom, you got to put on your computer and go into the restroom, where everything is monitored. So going from that, which is what I went from, when I worked at the call center for a little bit, it was basically micromanaged. Then before the call center, I worked at a lot of retail places where, basically you went in, you was told what all you needed to do that day, and you got all that done. So coming into IT, you have a little bit more freedom. So getting used to that freedom was an issue at first because you're so used to being told what to do when you're somewhere and you're not being told what to do, where you're given a set of checklists to go over, or if you know that you're resolving issues, or you know that you got these projects to work on. So a lot of times in IT, like I said, you will have a little bit of freedom. Some positions you may have a lot of freedom to where as long as you get your job done, long as you meet those deadlines, a lot of times nobody goes deep into what you're actually doing during the day. As long as you're meeting your job standard, as long as you're putting out good work. So it took a while to get used to this because, like I said, I went for those jobs where your manager may be on you all the time to a job where, your manager tells you what you need to get done, gives you a project or something like that. And like I said, it may be a couple of days or maybe a couple of weeks before that project comes back around, and maybe they ask for an update on that project. But they give you a little bit more freedom, which is good because being able to get used to having that freedom, it made me better at being able to get things done on time because it's knowing that, okay, nobody's going to be checking up on me or knowing that nobody's going to be breathing down my throat. It make you work more efficient because I was able to get things done because I knew I had those deadlines. So like I said, that was one of the big things of moving from not saying a regular job, but somewhere like retail or something like that to moving to the IT industry is that freedom that you get. And then as I'm going through my career, one of the things I realized that happened almost at every position that I worked at was that a lot of the issues I was getting after about 2 or 3 months, I started seeing those same issues. So it started to make me a little bit more confident. My confidence grew because I'm seeing those same issues. Now it's like I'm looking back on it like, man, a couple of months ago, I was scared to death when I seen this issue. Now I get this issue, I'm able to go in, resolve it, close the ticket. You get more confident as you start getting things right. You get more confidence with it. So with that, my confidence grew, which is something that you'll need in this industry also. So you got to be confident. You can't be hesitant in your configurations. If you're in networking, you can't be hesitant if you're troubleshooting somebody's PC. You need to decide on a way to fix the issue. Go ahead and, if you can, go ahead and put that in process or go ahead and execute on the way you need to fix that issue. And hopefully you fix the issue. If not, you work back around, see where you went wrong, figure out another way to fix the issue. And then another thing that helped me out that you don't hear about often is those soft skills. So being able to work with other people. So being able to work with other people, communicate with other people, have good teamwork. So not be a one person team. You can't be jointing all the time. It can't not be that one person team. Working with a team, a lot of times, depending on your position, that team becomes almost like your work family where y'all may have a group message or things like that to where if an issue goes on and it's in my area of where I'm located or where I stay, it wouldn't be no problem for me to go out, fix that issue, even though I may not be on call after hours or something like that. So those soft skills, being able to work with a team, then also getting better at documentation. So documentation is everything once you get into this industry. So getting better at documentation. And then also that customer service. So that customer service goes a long way also because with my retail jobs, most of those was customer service. And then, like I said, by the time I got to this position, my customer service was pretty okay. So, but I realized that these soft skills come into play just as much as the IT skills per se, or the configuration skills, the tech skills come in. So they each are equal. So there's not one that's more than the other, because a lot of times, depending on the position, if you got the soft skills and everything, a lot of times we can teach you the technical part. So soft skills goes a long way. So one thing to take from this is being able to adapt, because like I said, a lot of times you're going to be in a new environment. You're working around new people. You need to be able to adapt to your surroundings. And then with that, you pair that adaptability with soft skills, it can take you a long way. Quick pause. I'd like to introduce you to the Log Files. The Log Files is a weekly newsletter to help you start your IT career with practical advice and tips, powered by yours truly. I launched it in the beginning of the year. It's packed with actionable advice, resources, and insights to kickstart your IT journey. The link is in the description as well as pinned in the comments. So don't miss out. Now back to the episode. So the next tip I have for your first 5 years in IT is basically realizing that it's levels to this. So career growth comes from stepping stones. So basically, when I look back on my career, I realized that I didn't just shoot to top pay right off. So like I said, it wasn't like I came in computer ops. Next day, I was a network engineer. So basically, one of the things I had to realize, or one of the things you may need to realize, is that there's levels to this, and that everything has a stepping stone. So where basically I came in as computer ops, I got comfortable doing computer ops. Next thing I know, okay, a help desk position came open. Now I'm in help desk. I get comfortable doing help desk. I'm doing help desk for a little bit. Then that tech support position came open. So now I'm in tech support. I get comfortable in tech support. Now networking position comes open. So I moved to networking. So it all went in levels for me, where for some people, I've seen them come in and at their very first level, maybe an ops, and end up going to one of the higher up departments. That is possible. You do have some unicorns. But for most people, you got to realize there's steps to it. So if I wanted to end up in networking, sometimes, the opportunity to go straight to networking may not have been there. But while I'm waiting on that networking opportunity, I could move up to, let's say, something that's going to help me out when I get to networking, like help desk. That helped me out in networking. Desktop, that helped me out in networking, because a lot of it, like I stated earlier, was for the same organization. So I'm learning the infrastructure of that organization from these other roles. I'm not going to them physically, because in help desk, I'm tied behind those phones, but I do know some of the names of the closets. I'm learning that. I'm realizing where some of them are located at. So all of those positions came in handy by the time I got to networking. But realizing that you may come in at the bottom, whatever entry level role, it may take you some time to get to that top pay, or it may take you some time to get to the exact position that you're looking for. So it may be something along the lines of you coming in as a computer ops or a help desk. You've been there for a while, then moving up. Or it could be you've been there for a while and you're going to another company a level up. So you're going to another company as a desktop technician or a desktop support. Or maybe you're going to another company from desktop support into networking. But you got to realize there's levels to it. So you're not just going to come in at this entry level and then expect with less than a year to be at top pay as an engineer. A lot of times it just doesn't work that way. And then when I look back on this, if I could say there was any mistakes that I made, the mistake I would say I made in my career along those times was basically I waited too long to move up positions. So basically, when I moved up, it was like, it wasn't no other choice for me. So like I said, I stayed in that computer ops till, something came up where I realized that I needed more money. So I ended up, taking that help desk role, because that gave me a little bit more money. Then I didn't stay in help desk long. Then I went to desktop. Then at desktop, like I said, I was roughly there about 2 or 3 years before moving up to networking. But by this time, I'd already realized that, okay, you can't stay there too long, but the position I stayed at the longest was that computer ops. I was there roughly about half of my career. So probably about 4 or 5 years, I was working that computer ops position. I went from weekend nights, I went to weekdays, I went to third shift, was the last shift I worked before I moved on up to help desk. So Basically, like I said, once you get in these positions, you get the experience 1 to 3 years maybe. Then if there's another position you're trying to get to, after those 3 years, 3 years max, I would start back looking or start getting ready to look for my next move. There's one of the lessons you can take from this is basically don't get too comfortable. You always want to get comfortable being uncomfortable. So don't stay in one position too long and get comfortable. You got to be ready to take leaps to new opportunities, and that's just with everything in general. You know what I'm saying? If you stay doing the same thing for years, you get comfortable, you get stuck in that position, you get stuck in that routine, and then it's hard as I don't know what to switch up gears and jump out to take that leap of faith with something else. So once you get in these positions, get your experience right, and then, like I said, start looking for that next move until you get to where you want to go. So the next tip to help you out in your first 5 years in IT is realizing that habits is the key to long-term success. So for me, I'm a person of habits and routines. I like to build routines, stick to those routines. If I break that routine, a lot of times it's hard for me to get back on track. And this became clear when I got in networking. So in my early years before networking, I was one of the type of people, you hear people say, write down your goals. If you write it down, it helps you stick to it. I never did that. So I never wrote down any goals or anything like that. But when I got in networking, it forced me to start writing things down because, for one thing, it was a little bit more responsibility. So it was things that I needed to keep tabs on. It was projects I needed to work on. And there's tickets at the same time. So this is when I got into using a planner. So I bought my first planner when I was in networking. I started writing down my whole day for the days I was at work. So I started writing down things I need to do and everything for that day. And then I also started writing down goals, which that's something I do every year. So if you've been watching this podcast for a couple of years, if you notice, every January I buy a new planner. I go over my goals from last year, which ones I hit, which ones I didn't. And then I put my new goals for this year, for the current year, and what I'm trying to achieve. So I realized around that time that me building that habit, writing down my goals, a lot of times I would end up hitting those goals without even realizing it. Like there's a couple of goals I've already hit this year, and I was like, just looking back, you're like, dang, I done hit that goal, and I didn't even really realize it, but there's power to writing things down. So build that habit, start writing things down. If there's a certification you're trying to get, write down that certification. Okay, I want to get this certification within a year. Okay, start working towards that certification. If there's a career goal, if there's a position that you want, start researching that position, figure out the steps to get to that position. But I think buying your first planner, writing down your goals, writing down a path to follow your goals, all of that will help you to be more successful. So my next tip to help you out in your first 5 years in tech is don't fear responsibility. So one of the main things that I see as a mistake in my career was that I didn't move up fast enough from that very first position. And one of the reasons I didn't move up is because of I feared responsibility. I was the person that was calling the people, waking them up in the middle of the night for all types of issues. So every time I would call someone, it's in a position that I liked. Mainly back then, it was networking and desktop. So whenever I called one of those guys, I would often think to myself, man, that could have been me getting called in the middle of the night. And around that time, like I said, I'm in my late 20s maybe. So around that time, I don't want no other responsibility. I want to do my job and go home. And in that computer ops, that's what it gave me. I did my job, I went home. So basically that fear of responsibility basically hindered my career a little bit. So as you get in your career those first 5 years, don't fear responsibility. Like I said, it's not as bad as it looks from when you're just starting out. For me just starting out, I'm like, man, what happens if they can't solve it? I'm thinking all the negative. What happens if they can't solve it? What happens if they put in the wrong command and it brings the network down? I'm thinking about all this type of stuff. So like I said, that early hesitation, like I said, it made me where I didn't take that leap fast enough. One of the lessons I learned, like I said, in order to grow, in order to advance, If you want higher pay, especially if that's a motivator, you're going to have to take on more responsibility. Usually the more money you're getting paid, the more responsibility you have. So if you want that career growth, if you want to advance in IT, be ready to take on responsibility. A lot of times it looks better than what it is from the outside looking in as you get in that position. Because for one thing, like I said, I always feared getting called on networking, getting called in the middle of the night. Once I got in networking, I realized that, if I get called in the middle of the night, there's a system to it. There was a protocol. Decide if it's urgent or not. If there's something I could take care of in the morning. Worst case scenario, like I said, your team becomes almost like your work family. So if it was issues I really couldn't solve and it was something that was urgent, I had other teammates I could call and get help from. So it made it where I'm like, man, it wasn't as bad as I thought because I'm from the outside looking in. I'm not knowing what's going on in the background. I just know who I call. I'm not knowing if they called anyone or not. So that's one of the things I think held me back early in my career. And once you get in this position, don't let it hold you back. So in closing, what's one thing you wish someone had told you before you started your IT career? Let me know in the comments. So that brings me to the end of this episode. Hopefully you found some value in this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're on Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook, you can follow me at DebtFreeinIT. If you have any questions, you can email me at debtfreeinit@gmail.com, or you can visit me at debtfreeinitwithmike.com. Other than that, I'll see you next week. Peace.